Back in 2022, Europe made a bold decision. It moved to rip out its dependence of Russian pipeline gas and rebuilt its energy system largely around seaborne LNG, which is the ships that carry frozen gas across oceans. It was hailed as a masterstroke, a continent finally free from the pipe that Moscow could shut at will. But fast forward to today, and that fix now leaves Europe more exposed than ever before. It swapped a land dependency for a maritime one, running right through the Strait of Hormuz and past the coast of Qatar. And right now, as winter gets closer, Europe is sitting on its thinnest gas buffer in 15 years. Prices are surging, and the cargoes it so badly needs are being bid away by Asian buyers before they ever reach European shores. So today, we break down why Europe is the worst positioned gas buyer on Earth right now, why Washington has absolutely no reason to hurry to fix it, and what a bad winter will do to an already struggling European economy. My name is Nick, and this is the Finance Bureau. Okay, for starters, let's see how Europe even got into this position. Back in 2022, Russian pipeline gas was a vulnerability, a single supplier with a political off switch. So Europe replaced it with LNG shipped in from all over the world. And on paper, for a while, it worked. EU imports of American gas soared from 18.9 billion cubic meters in 2021 to 75.6 billion by 2025. LNG now accounts for a full 62% of all European gas imports. But remember, we're not talking about pipes when it comes to LNG. It's a global floating commodity, which basically means you no longer control the supply, but compete for the ship. If you own the pipe, the gas comes to you. But when you rely on tankers, you're bidding against every other buyer on the planet for a cargo that can turn around mid-ocean and sail somewhere else more profitable. But there's another problem here. To replace Russian pipeline gas, Europe leaned harder than ever before on one remaining pipeline supplier: Norway. Norway now provides around a third of Europe's total gas, and by some measures, more than half of its pipeline gas specifically. The problem, though, is that Norwegian production is plateauing at around 110 to 120 billion cubic meters, and recent months have actually shown slight declines. So Europe traded a diversified dependency for a concentration risk, with Norway becoming the new single point of failure. And the old Russian infrastructure has largely been decommissioned, which means there's no going back. Europe is fully committed to this LNG and Norway model, and so that's a vulnerability. So what happens when a shock arrives? Well, it already has. In late February 2026, US and Israeli strikes on Iran started, and Iran declared the Strait of Hormuz a closed military zone. For a brief reminder, the Strait of Hormuz carries around 20% of the entire world's LNG supply. Of course, there was a brief window of hope recently. A US-Iran truce was signed on June 17th. But, as I'm sure you're probably all aware, that truce collapsed and hostilities have reignited in a big way. As a result, LNG tanker traffic through the strait has collapsed to near standstill, with commercial flows down to roughly 15% of pre-war levels. Oil tanker traffic has fallen by roughly 85%, dropping to about 15% of pre-war levels as of late July. But the impact quickly spills over from oil directly into the gas markets. The Iranian missile strikes in March went further than just closing the strait because they directly hit Qatar. Iranian strikes damaged Ras Laffan, Qatar's LNG complex, and Qatar Energy declared force majeure. And that took roughly 17% of Qatar's export capacity offline, about 12.8 million tons a year, with repairs estimated to take between 3 and 5 years. Now remember, Qatar is the world's second largest LNG exporter. It's historically supplied around 25% of Asia's LNG and about 8% of Europe's. Goldman Sachs estimates a reduction of 16 million tons for the balance of the summer, which is roughly 4% of the global supply just gone. Fewer cargoes in the global pool and everyone chasing the same shrinking supply. Faith Birol, the head of the IEA, warned that the global economy faces serious trouble unless the strait sees a full reopening within weeks. But it gets worse for Europe, guys, because when cargoes get scarce, price premiums decide who gets what, and Europe is losing out. Asian buyers who normally take Qatari and Gulf gas through Hormuz are now cut off from it, so they're out hunting the same non-Middle East cargoes that Europe needs. This is a bidding war, and it comes down to just two benchmarks: JKM, which is the Asian price, versus TTF, which is the European price. Whoever bids higher wins the ship, and Asian buyers are bidding aggressively. Asian spot prices hit around $20 per million BTU in mid-July, with Pakistan paying a record $21.88 for a single emergency cargo. And the result is already showing up clear as day in the data. For the first time in 2 years, less than half of US LNG exports went to Europe in June 2026. Europe's imports are sinking to their lowest level in 2 years, while Asian imports are hitting multi-month highs. And European TTF prices have broken above 60 euros per megawatt hour, roughly a 33% jump since the end of June, matching levels last seen during the initial Qatar strikes in March 2026. And there's one piece of data here that's truly wild. The IEA noted the correlation between Asian and European gas prices hit an all-time high of 0.955% in 2025. In plain terms, a shock in the Middle East now transmits almost instantly and almost fully into European prices. So there's no hiding from it, and the clock is ticking. Europe has roughly 3 months to refill its storage, and Qatar's force majeure isn't expected to lift until autumn, with some reports pushing it to mid-October. Time is of the essence, and developments here could make or break European markets. But of course, keeping track of a story this complicated and fast-moving is next to impossible. And that's exactly why you should sign up for the Finance Bureau newsletter. It's completely free and it lands once a week in your inbox. We break down the biggest developments in global markets, commodities, and macro, so you never miss what truly matters for your portfolio. Just click the link in the description or scan this QR code on the left of your screen to get started. Back to the bidding war, and the country that seems to be winning from all of it. Because while Europe stresses out trying to prepare itself, there's one player watching this crisis with a very different expression on its face: America. The United States is now the swing supplier of the entire global gas market. It provided 93% of all global LNG export growth in 2025, with exports rising 27% to 5.2 trillion cubic feet. And there's a piece of detail here that truly changes the whole dynamic. American gas at home is dirt cheap. Henry Hub, which is the US benchmark, is sitting at just $2.92 per million BTU, which is actually down over 9% in a month. Meanwhile, Asian buyers are paying around $20 for the same gas once it's shipped. Even after the roughly $6 to $7 it costs to liquefy, ship, and regasify, every cargo diverted to a panicking Asian buyer is enormously profitable for an American exporter. And that's why Cheniere Energy, one of the biggest US LNG players, is up nearly 18% in a single month. And Brent crude was up almost 37% over the same window. So, just look at the situation we've got here. For American sellers, a Hormuz squeeze that spikes global prices is actually a massive windfall. Now, to be clear, nobody has found a smoking gun proving Washington is deliberately slow-walking a resolution to boost export margins. But you don't need intent to see the problem in front of our eyes. US export contracts are typically linked to cheap Henry Hub gas, with full destination flexibility built in. Which means whenever Asia pays more than Europe, the ship simply turns around toward Asia. And that's arguably the worst part for Europe. There's no urgent lever for an ally to pull, because your pain is quite literally someone else's export margin. Europe has become collateral damage in a game being played entirely above its head. But as Europe faces another very serious energy crisis, it's important to note that not all of Europe's wounds were inflicted from the outside. Take Germany, for example. In April 2023, Germany completed its nuclear phase-out, shutting down its final 3 reactors. Chancellor Friedrich Merz has since called that decision a, quote, huge mistake, and you can see why. Germany now sits on just 45% storage, the weak link in the entire continent. And it's struggling to build a 1.5 billion euro state-owned strategic gas reserve funded by a new levy on electricity consumers. In essence, Germany is building emergency insurance after the fire has already started and handing the bill to ordinary households. But the strangest self-inflicted wound of all is what analysts are calling the storage paradox. Normally, you buy gas cheap in summer, store it, and then sell it dear in the winter, and that profit is what motivates companies to fill the tanks. But this year, seasonal spreads collapsed to as low as minus 2.4 euros per megawatt hour since April. In other words, it was actively unprofitable to buy gas now and store it for the winter. So, even staring down the obvious geopolitical risk, the commercial incentive to full storage simply evaporated. July injection rates hit their lowest level since 2011, down 17% year-on-year. And that's why EU storage is sitting at just 53% full, around 15 percentage points below the 5-year average. Equinor's CEO warned that Europe may enter winter with its smallest supply buffer in 15 years. The legal target is 90% by November, but the EU has relaxed that to 80%. And analysts think that even 75 to 78% is the realistic ceiling. But there's one more piece of irony in all of this that makes things flat out embarrassing for Europe. Despite the grand phase-out pledge, the EU is importing more Russian LNG, not less. EU imports of Russian Yamal LNG rose by roughly 15 to 18% in the first half of 2026, hitting nearly 10 million tons. The top buyers? France, Belgium, and Spain. The formal ban doesn't even take effect until January 1st, 2027, and Greece has already secured a 12-month exemption for its shipping companies to keep carrying Russian gas. So the dependency Europe swore it had escaped never really left. Now at this point you might be thinking, well, this is a problem for utility companies and traders. But it's bigger than that, because gas is what economists call the marginal fuel, which means it's usually the last, most expensive plant switched on to meet demand. And so it sets the price for the entire power market. When gas spikes, electricity spikes with it. European wholesale power prices have already blown past 110 euros per megawatt hour, with Italy hitting daily averages as high as 172 euros in late July. And guys, that reaches everyone, not just the gas buyers. Business energy bills just jumped. For households, heating and electricity costs also climbed into winter, meaning anyone in the Eurozone economy is now feeling it in the price of everyday goods. Eurozone energy inflation is running at 8.5%, far above the ECB's 2% target. And markets are now pricing in a possible rate hike in September if the shock persists. Higher energy, higher inflation, higher borrowing costs. Not a great mixture. But perhaps the deepest damage is happening to Europe's industrial backbone. Consider the energy-hungry industrials and where they stand. Chemicals, fertilizer, glass, and steel. Many of these plants idled during the 2022 crisis and never fully came back. And now they're facing a second hit. Since 2022, the European chemical industry has lost around 10% of its production capacity, with Germany's chemical production down another 3% in the first half of 2026. Investment in the sector has collapsed by 86% year-on-year, and plant closures across Europe have surged sixfold since 2022. Take BASF, the giant of German chemicals. It's targeting 2.3 billion euros in annual cost savings, and it's reduced its Ludwigshafen workforce by roughly 3,000 jobs since 2024, even as it raised its 2026 earnings outlook. At the same time, it's pouring 8.7 billion euros into a brand new site in Jiangxing, China, explicitly to escape Europe's punishing costs. BASF executives have warned that Europe's high energy costs are risk-pushing investment overseas, saying the money will leave before the emissions ever do. And there's a term for everything I just mentioned: de-industrialization. We're watching a slow bleed of factories, jobs, and competitiveness leaving the European continent. The ultimate cost falls on European households staring at the heating bills that they just can't control, factory workers losing their jobs to China, and ordinary savers watching inflation eat away their wages. But the worst part is that Europe wasn't the victim of some sort of a surprise. This is a direct result of a series of poor decisions which many had vocally protested over the last decade or more. And the result? Well, European policymakers are now praying for a mild winter. Of course, one way or another, Europe will survive this winter. But what matters now is whether it has actually learned anything from the crisis, or whether it's just rehearsing the same mistake it made in 2022, just on an even bigger scale. But what do you think? Has Europe walked itself into another major crisis that will cripple it? Or will policymakers find a creative way to solve the problem? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoy deep dives like this, then you might want to find out what China is up to as Europe struggles on the international stage. And you can check out our video on that right over here. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Nick, signing off.